Hi, everyone. Now that it's 3 o'clock, we will be getting started. Welcome to the concurrent session B5, Breaking Barriers, Peer Mentorship and Reintegration for Justice-Involved Individuals. My name is Ina, and I'm joined by my colleague Amelia, and we will be the facilitators for this session. Before we get started, I'm just going to review a few quick housekeeping notes, and then we'll introduce our speaker and begin the session. So I'd first like to draw your attention to the bottom of your screen where you'll find the Zoom toolbar. You can use the Q&A feature to submit any questions throughout the presentation. We will review these questions at the end of the session and do our best to answer as many as possible. Please ensure that your microphone is on mute until the Q&A portion of this session. Please note we will be recording this session to upload to the conference website for any future viewing for those who are registered for this conference, and you'll have access to the platform for 90 days following the conference. I would like to remind everyone that we do have closed captionings for all of our sessions, so please click on the CC icon in the window below on your screen to access this function. At the end of the session, we kindly ask you to complete the evaluation for this session by clicking on the session in the agenda on the virtual platform. There will be a survey button at the bottom of the session next to the join button. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and will be used to inform future events such as this conference. We would like to respectfully ask those who are attending today's session to engage with each other thoughtfully and always consider the impact of your words and interaction on others. As facilitators, we will not tolerate any abuse or inappropriate behavior or hate speech, and we will ensure that everyone who engages in such behavior is removed from the session. If you have been disturbed or affected by such an event, please do what you need to do for you. Take a break, step outside, practice deep breathing, and/or reach out to someone you trust. If you are in crisis and require immediate support, please click on the FAQ icon on the conference homepage to access contact information for Connects Ontario. If you would like to report an incident, contact the event manager, Sherry Shim, by either clicking on the assistance button on the top right menu bar on your screen to send an email, or text Sherry at 416-605-5975. I will now introduce you to our presenter for this session. So I will pass it over to Olusola from Safeguard Training for Children and Adult Services. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. And thanks everyone for being here this afternoon. So happy afternoon to everyone. My name is Olusola Olumogba. I'm with Safeguard Training. I'm a certified peer support specialist. And today I'll be talking about breaking barriers, peer mentorship and reintegration for justice-involved individuals. Um, you know, Even though I will be speaking today, like if there's anything that needs to be clarified or if there's any questions that, anyone in the audience feels like they want to ask, please feel free to. I like to make this, engagement as engaging as possible. There will be, towards the end of it, there will be a Q&A. So I'll look forward to you guys enjoying to get your feedback on it. But in the meantime, I'll get started now and then we'll get into it. Okay. So like I said, my name is Olusola Olumogba. I'm a certified peer support specialist, as well as a critical peer interventionist. I've worked in many different leadership roles with a few different agencies throughout the years. I have a focus on supporting people involved in high-risk behavior, as well as security threat groups. So anyone that's involved in anything gang or organized crime related, extremists, as well as like any biker networks as well too. Um, throughout my time, I've had the opportunity to work with many different individuals, many different institutions, around 1,000, well, closer to 900. And like I said, I'm currently doing training with Safeguards training as well too. So for today's session, we will touch on the challenge, why peer mentorship works, the game model, a transformation story, as well as collaboration, talk about what we've learned, so what we've went through, as well as practical tools to take back and define success. And then towards the end of the session, we will have the opportunity to have a discussion. So first things first, the challenge, the systemic barriers. So racialized communities, especially Black and Indigenous or people of color in Canada, are overrepresented at every stage in the criminal justice system, and they face deep barriers upon release. And generally speaking, how that looks, it could look in many different ways. When we talk about the systemic piece now, the systemic barriers, some policies, some systems are in place, not necessarily to support, Black or Indigenous fellows, but mainly to either keep them in place or bring them down. So throughout, decades, there's been many different factors that's contributed to this. But this is like right now in 2025, this is our reality. This is what we face. So, employment discrimination. We'll touch on employment discrimination first. So formerly incarcerated individuals are 50% less likely to secure employment than the general population. Um, and we already know right now in the general population, employment isn't the easiest thing to secure for many different factors as well, too. So it does impact the population a lot worse, mainly due to the fact that they have that handicap of having a criminal record. So and then Black job applicants face disproportionately higher hiring discrimination, even with identical resumes. On top, like I said, on top of having that, criminal record, kind of lingering behind them. Sometimes, just simply having a name that's foreign to Canada, a name that's an African name or Caribbean name could also be a hinder, when it comes to actually getting employment as well, too. In the population that we do work with, we do see a lot of newcomers who are already having these challenges of reintegrating society from wherever they migrated from. But when they get in conflict with the criminal justice system, it almost makes it impossible for them to catch up, mainly because, going to jail, could hinder you in many different areas of your life. But also too, on top of like dealing with all of the factors that come with being a new migrant, now you have a criminal record to face. And then criminal records create that long-term exclusion, increasing financial instability. And there's one part of the employment piece, when it comes to like, having a criminal record, how it impacts your employment search or just even your employment when you do get employment, because you could be within an agency or a company and having a criminal record, you may be able to be at your position that you are right now, but you may not be able to get a promotion or to do certain tasks that will hinder your work or hinder your performance. And that's what criminal records could do. Also, too, when we talk about increasing financial stability, criminal records just don't stop at the employment piece or the housing piece. It actually goes into like, to things like having life insurance or having housing insurance, stuff like that. Depending on your criminal record, you could be completely denied, life insurance or housing insurance, or pay a substantial amount of money than the average person because you have that criminal record. So, you know, um, when it comes to having a criminal record and employment, sometimes it can feel like employers will weaponize that, which ends up having a negative outcome for the individual who is trying to find work or employment or further their career as well. Then we'll touch on the transitional housing gaps. So up to 30% of people leaving custody have no stable housing to return to. Black and Indigenous individuals are more likely to experience homelessness or hidden homelessness immediately after release. Without housing, recidivism risk increases significantly. You know, ha having and I'll share the just give you guys some self-disclosure. I do have my own personal lived experience of actually dealing with this, but this was back in 2007 that lasted up until 2010, where the economy was a lot more stable, a lot more different than what it is now. Um, since the pandemic, since 2020 and moving forward, the idea of homelessness has become more and more relevant when it comes to the idea of like, reintegrating back in society and transitioning back and like just going back to your stable life or trying to create a stable life. For people who are in parole within CSC, the Correctional Services Canada, it's normal now to get parole, but wait up to 3 or 4 months because there's no bed space, which was not an issue back, 10, 15 years ago. It was more like, you had plenty of options. When I say plenty of options, maybe one, two or more options when it came to finding a halfway house or any type of like transition home. Whereas just like now it's oversaturated. The norm is to get parole and then wait another 3, 4 months. So, you got to think about how that's impacting the mental health of someone who's in custody, who has done everything they had to do to get granted parole, to get granted release. But due to the realities of the housing gaps, they may have to wait to 3 to 4 months, which could also cause, which could also be dangerous in the sense of just like, because when you get parole, like even though you haven't been released yet, you're technically a free person. Being a free person in a prison where there's other people who aren't going to be free anytime soon, we've seen that lead to, people being targeted, purposely being targeted in effort to like, ruin their chances of getting out. Or people just like, having mental breakdowns, because they couldn't like, move past the extra 3, 4 months that they needed to do prior to getting out. And that's just one issue. And even like, as we see this growing, even in the provincial jails, where you don't have to get parole, you can just get released, you know, um, at some institutions now, like they're providing tents now. They're providing tents, when they're not able to find other forms of, housing, either if it's getting connected with a transition home, a shelter. Another option has been just getting them tents, to pitch outside of a shelter, so they could live outside, but have access to like, the amenities that the shelter will have. So in the past 15 years, just even in the past 5 years, it's changed dramatically in the transitional housing space, especially for the Black and Indigenous individuals leaving custody. So we talk about mental health and stigma. Mental health and stigma. So 3 in 4 individuals in federal custody have diagnosable mental health and or substance use challenges. System-involved Black and Indigenous individuals experience trauma rooted in intergenerational harm, which the Canadian government still refuses to like to take complete responsibility for. Anti-Black racism and colonialism as well too. Something that's very active to this very day, and especially within the justice system, the loss of family, community connection. After a while, these guys just get used to being alone, used to not being part of their community, their family, which contributes to the not the stigmatization, but the institutionalized, being used to being in custody versus being out in the community. Um, and then the stigma and poor continuity of care, blocked services, access post-release. So, and kind of like drawing the picture of this, on top of, having to wait that 3, 4 months if you're in the federal system, to get parole, get released. Um, a lot of like, what these guys deal with, while they're in custody, is this stigma, this traumatization, um, of, being involved in the system while being Black and or Indigenous. When we talk about the intergenerational harm, you know, as our federal budget got tabled today, part of that budget, or not part of the budget, but like, what we've noticed was that, the lack of, as well as like, some of the harm that's being caused by the government to the Black community. We have Black government workers who are pursuing, legal action, to be treated fairly and equally within the government system. These are, workers who are Black who work in the system, and our government is putting, $15 million plus towards fighting the accountability that they've had in creating this mess. So when we talk about, intergenerational harm and anti-Black racism and colonialism, like that's how it looks, you know, um, is by everyone realizing, the atrocities that's happened to Indigenous and Black people, but still doing nothing to change it or still doing nothing to improve the situation. And it's even straight downright not even taking accountability for it. When we talk about, $15 million, that's the most that the government has ever put against any class action suit, against any, group that's suited, you know what I mean? And it looks like they're not, stopping anytime soon to avoid accountability when it comes to like what they've done to Black people in Canada. So that's just some of like the realities of the mental health struggles that Black and Indigenous people face while in custody, as well as being in the system and transitioning back into the community. So limited supports after release. So reintegration supports are scarce. They're short-term and they're inconsistent across regions. And that's for many different reasons. Sometimes it could be capacity. It could be simply the funding, the contracted end Or it could just be that, a lot of what we're seeing now in this space is we're seeing a lot of new behaviors, new trends that maybe the support systems have not caught up to yet as well. Uh, Culturally relevant support, especially peer mentorship, it remains severely underfunded. And kind of like, speaking to, Correction Services Canada, they've made they've made attempts, to to address culturally relevant support. But within CSC, a lot of people just move around from one position to another position. So they may have a culturally relevant or culturally um, a cultural rep there for a Black or Indigenous population, but the reality is, that cultural rep was maybe a year or two ago, correctional guard. So now they're coming there in support of Black people or the Indigenous people. A lot of participants or a lot of people in custody don't really buy that because, just last year, like I said, they were in another position, handling them in a certain way. And it just kind of like, perpetuates or recycles individuals, within the space to just keep it going versus actually making a change. So even though like I said, there are attempts there too, if it could feel as if like, the sure way to get it done is completely ignored, which would be, getting people who actually represent the culture that you are supporting, as well as like I said, that peer mentorship is as well, that peer mentorship piece as well too. So fragmented systems, justice, housing, employment, health, they often operate in silos, leading to gaps in care. So, when it comes to, justice, housing, employment, and health, we have it. In Canada, we have these services, we have these supports. But in working together is where the challenge is. And where we see is a lot of institutions or a lot of agencies working in silos, not necessarily for one reason or the other, but for many different factors. But the reality is the outcome leaves a pretty inconsistent transition or process for the individuals that we are supporting. So yes, and just realizing that there are agencies, institutions, supports that are out there, getting them to work together is something that we need to improve on as a community of people who are supporting this population. So the key message here that I wanted to deliver was these systemic inequities are not personal failures, they are policy failures that limit dignity, safety, and opportunity. When it comes to this area, a lot of it is, I feel like a lot of it is actually factoring in that lived experience piece, showing value to it, as well as like factoring into the policies that are created. There's a lot of red tape around the work we do, and for good reason. And for some reasons that are pretty outdated, that may need to be addressed or updated now. But for the most part, it feel like it's something that can be fixed, can be addressed if it's more pushed in the forefront of the work that we do. So now I'm going to get into why peer mentorship works. So why it works. It builds trust through lived experience. People with similar justice, especially criminal justice experience, they build rapport faster and reduce resistance to services. Peer mentors understand trauma, institutionalization, and stigma firsthand, something most professionals cannot replicate. And this isn't to take away anything that professionals bring to the table, but there's the academic, you know, um, it's the academic part, the clinical component that comes to it, but none of this cannot replicate what having that lived experience could do. Lived experience, is that pot of gold that I feel like we're finally kind of tapping into right now. Um, the trust improves program engagement and retention. When someone feels that they've seen someone that's done it, they could do it too. When someone feels that, someone can identify feelings that they may not be able to identify, that builds trust. That builds confidence in the individual because they could see, okay, I'm here right now. I could be there at some date, at a later date. It gives a real sign of hope versus kind of just being told how to fit into society. Like a society that, most of the time doesn't accept us, for who we are, or just simply hates us just for being Black or Indigenous, whatever the case may be. Um, that trust right there allows for those barriers to be reduced, as well as, like I said, for the individual to be more engaged in whatever that process looks like for them. Number two, that safe, culturally relevant support. So Black and Indigenous individuals are often feel over surveilled and understood through stereotypes and mainstream systems, even like in our community, in certain areas within the Greater Toronto area, even certain areas within Ottawa and other parts of Canada. Um, those communities are usually over surveilled, which leads to more criminal charges, more criminality, and more stereotypes. And same thing in prisons. Even though you think everyone would be surveilled because a crime was broken and they need to be surveilled, it's still the Black population, probably more than the Indigenous population, that gets over surveilled in these institutions as well as systems as well too. The second one, peer mentors provide belonging and cultural affirmation, key components of resilience. So peer mentors, in providing that cultural affirmation, it allows the participants to build that resilience as well too, to actually ask someone that has gone through the situation, that has overcome the barriers, what could I do next? How'd you do this to overcome this, etc. Versus kind of being told by someone who may have the education, who may have the background, which is very valuable, but it doesn't replicate that lived experience. It doesn't replicate what the individual, the peer mentor has went through, as well as what the individual who's going through the situation is going to go through right now. So cultural congruence, so improve mental health outcomes. It also helps, like I said, helps with the mental health challenge and also helps them to understand what questions to ask and what direction to take as, this journey, brings new turns, new hurdles. Number three, accountability anchored in understanding. So peers model pro-social behavior rooted in shared identity, aka I've been where you are, credibility. So that credibility piece is important, you know. Um, being told, what to do, or not so much being told what to do, but getting directions and guidance from someone who has been through what you've been through versus someone who hasn't, or if you're looking at someone that's individual, like you're on the opposite side of the spectrum, you're on the opposite side of this battle that I'm facing, then you're not going to have much credibility at all. Versus someone who could say, hey, I've been where you've been through, I know what you're about to go through. This is how you can move forward with it. That goes a long way. Research shows peer-based accountability is more sustainable than authority-based compliance. At the end of the day, we're all human beings. No one likes being told what to do, especially a grown-up, So with that peer-based model, is that mutuality, that expectation of this is what you expect from me, this is what I can expect from you. So there's that accountability piece that the peer mentor and the individual can hold each other accountable versus just it kind of being this power dynamic of if you don't do what I say, then this could possibly lead to a negative outcome or some type of consequence. It also supports improved self-regulation as well as reduced recidivism. With peer supports, one thing that they teach their mentees or whoever they're supporting is how to deal with problems. It's how to regulate. They help with the identity piece. They help with the thinking piece, and they also help with the skills that the individual could adopt from them to apply and use in their lives to deal with a very unique situation that even though there's a lot of people that work in this space, there's not a lot of people who's actually experienced what these individuals are experiencing as well too. And then number four, there's the leadership and identity rebuilding. So going back to what I just mentioned, how peer mentors help with helping the individual build their identity or rebuild their identity. Positive identity shift from offender to mentor. It increases motivation for dissentance. Giving back to others strengthens purpose and belonging. Peer roles reduce internalized stigma as well as promote that long-term success. So that leadership and identity piece there, a lot of what individuals do, a lot of what everyone does comes from how we look at ourselves. That identity shift is important in getting the individual where they need to be, where they want to go, to become who they want to become. So the key insight here is healing and transformation happens in relationships, especially relationships grounded in shared experience and hope. You know, um, one thing I've learned in this space is, there's sometimes, we can have a lot of sympathy, but I feel like we need to have more empathy because sometimes, sympathy could drive people apart versus empathy drives us together. You know, you don't necessarily have to have gone to jail or have that lived experience, but sometimes we can empathize in the feelings that we have for each other. When so, in like I said, kind of adding to this key insight that what I'm talking about here about healing and transformation happens in relationships. Um, I feel like what could contribute to that is having more empathy and less sympathy. Like I said, the sympathy, even though like we may mean well by it, it doesn't bring us any closer to the individual or bring us any closer to the individual's goal. Where empathy brings us closer together. Empathy helps us understand each other when we don't fully understand the situation, but we understand where we fit into that situation and how we can support. When a man sees someone who has survived what he's going through and thriving, that becomes powerful evidence that change is possible. It becomes powerful that no matter how far that they've went off, that they can still get back on track and get to where they need to be. I'm going to touch on the game model right now. I'm just going to quickly take a look in the chat here. I've seen some chats. I'm not sure if anyone's having me. Okay. So the game model. So when we talk about the game model here, not necessarily, you know, this specific type of model, but having these different components in the model. So for game, I mean guidance, awareness, mentorship, and employment/education. It aligns with the global best practice for reducing recidivism and improving long-term community success. So generally speaking, in successful reintegration programs or where they have a higher chance of having success, these four components are in it. There's not all of it. There's many different components depending on who you're working with and the population you're serving. But these four components are usually where you'll find it. So I'm going to touch on everything right now and bring it all together for us. So the guidance, the navigation and planning. So reentry navigation significantly improves system access to housing, healthcare, and income supports. When it comes to reintegration, plans that I've seen, I would say a majority of them are great plans. The execution of it is something else. Is actually keeping them to stick with the plans, keeping everyone to stick with the plans. Generally speaking, sticking with the plan, keeping the main thing gets you to where you need to be. But structured reentry case management reduces recidivism by up to 20 to 30%. So, there's no cookie cutter plan with the individuals that we work with. For anyone who's ever worked in this space, worked with any specific group within this space, I'm sure they understand that there's no cookie cutter, plan for each person. Everyone has their own way of getting to where they need to be. But having it structured, having it intentional, being intentional with it, we do see reduces our recidivism by up to 20 to 30%. As well as navigation counters the service maze that traps people in instability. Um, it can be difficult, like I said, rebuilding your life when you have many of these roadblocks in front of you, as well as just like I said, just not having the resources to navigate or knowing where to turn to. So the guidance is very important. If you're a youth, adults, whatever the case may be, um, and as service providers, we can't feel, and despite, like I said, me putting a lot of emphasis and value on lived experience, you know, we can't, we can't limit or minimize, the value that we bring as service providers to this space, especially when it comes to helping them navigate services, as well as, like I said, just having more of that empathy piece versus the sympathy piece. But, sometimes like in the work that I've done, where I see people I guess fall off the track of that positive road that they're on is when it comes to navigating the service maze. that's when it becomes challenging. That's when it becomes, difficult to understand the lingo that's going on. Especially when you don't understand certain services. Sometimes it may scare them or it just may completely shut them down, and then, things start to fall off the road right there. That guidance piece is important. Next, the self-awareness, the identity, the mindset change. It all starts in the mind. I like telling everyone it all starts in the mind. You feel me? So identity transformation is the strongest predictor of long-term dissonance. Sorry, dissonance. I think I said that wrong a couple times now. My bad. Um, but like I said, it starts with how they look at themselves. It starts with being aware of themselves. And it doesn't happen overnight. It can happen in months, years, but it takes time. But like I said, in having that awareness piece, it helps you manage your identity as well as your mindset a lot better. The cognitive, cultural, and motivational interventions improve decision making and reduce risk behaviors. So with the awareness piece, the timing is necessary and crucial as well too. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to change or who refuses to take a look at themselves. So we're not necessarily here to fix people, but like I said, just raise that awareness of that. Because when they're aware of what's going on, then it's easier to have these discussions around certain behaviors that, are problematic and lead to criminality. As well as just being aware of programs that address racism, trauma, and belonging, they increase psychological well-being as well too. There's definitely a lot more increase of these programs in it, but at the same time, I'm not enough to support everyone that's in need of it right now. Then the mentorship, that connection plus accountability. People are more likely to change when accountability comes from trusted peers. When they could get constructive feedback from an individual they feel is there for them versus an individual that's against them. Peer mentorship increases engagement, service follow through, and hope. Um, they can speak a lot more freely. They understand it's not so much a power dynamic. They understand that, their input matters, that it's not just, hey, you do this, you do what I say, or I'm going to go back and tell your parole officer, your probation officer, whatever the case may be. It's more from a place of, I'm asking this of you in an effort to meet the goals that you set out for yourself. Um, Kind of like a coach. As peer mentors, we're not just, peers, mentors, we're coaches, we're many different things, at many different times in an individual's journey on that. For mentors, it's also important for us to be aware of when we need to maybe be a coach or be a friend. I'm not saying be their friend, but you can be friendly with them. You can have friendly discussions with them. And then there's that social connection. It's one of the top factors protecting against reoffending. Getting them connected with the right people at the right time. Getting it happen, letting it happen in a timely manner is important. You know, um, they may not be ready to connect with family member at this point in their journey, but maybe later on they will be. But in the meantime, getting them connected with things that will build them up to get to that next level is important as well too. So it's always important to understand, that connection and accountability piece as well. Then the employment and education piece, skills plus independence. So employment within 12 months of release cuts recidivism nearly in half. Education and skills development significantly boosts income and stability, as well as economic mobility equals freedom from survival-based decision making. So that skill building is important. Skills pay the bills. Before you can earn more, you have to learn more. And that piece is important as well, too, in a sense of just being intentional with it. You know, Programs that are available. There's a lot of great programs that are available. Like I said, just getting that connection piece. There's a lot of unique programs that address a lot of unique factors that lead to criminality in certain groups and populations that are in Ontario or Canada. And like I said, when it comes to that, a lot of it's just being aware of what's available or what's not available. So why the model works of guidance, awareness, mentorship, and education/employment is it addresses the four critical drivers for people reoffending. For this desistance there. Hope I said it right. You know what I'm saying? Um, Hope, skills, identity, and belonging. the game model is more than just a simple model. It's a holistic transformative approach. You can't rebuild your life if you don't believe you deserve one. And if you don't have the tools to sustain it, then following the game model helps the individuals or helps the service provider or mentor guide the individual through that work. Now I'm just going to quickly go over the transformative story. It's 3:35 now, so we're still on pace. We're still making good time, everyone. So a transformative story. So generally speaking, when an individual does get connected with a service provider while in custody or before the courts, some of the factors that we do see, and it's not with everyone, and it's not all of these factors that we do see, but sometimes there's a lack of identity clarity, negative influence, survival-based decisions, the high-risk environment and limited supports, systemic barriers due to racism and criminalization, as well as risk factors that outweigh protective factors. The last one, risk factors that outweigh protective factors. You know, um, a lot of participants, they could get, all the skill building, get connected with employment, um, you know, but if they're returning back to a high crime neighborhood that's, you know, consumed with crime on a daily, weekly basis, then it's going to be challenging for them to deal with that. It's going to be a lot easier for them just to fall back into like, problematic behaviors versus having an actual straight path to getting where they need to be. But generally speaking, during the intervention phase, while the individual is working with peer mentors or peer supports, we've seen an increase in self-awareness. So participating in cognitive and identity-based interventions leads to better decision making. So coming from that, using that peer mentoring approach versus that authoritative approach, they become part of their case plan. They become part of their um, reintegration plan, a major part, probably the biggest part of that, versus the decision being made by everyone else. The reflective practices establish personal accountability and future orientation. The same way everyone on that case management team has their role to play, the main player is the individual at hand there. So it also reduces risk factors as well too. So with that, you get access to trauma-informed supports or any other type of cultural relevant supports, as well as replacing harmful peer networks with pro-social relationships. So even if you're not becoming friends with that individual, at least they're starting to have positive models in their life, on a consistent, ongoing basis as well too. Then the post-release outcome. They usually get connected with stable housing and employment, and these two factors cut recidivism almost in half. And then like now they're supporting others. So giving back creates leadership into identity and reinforces pro-social behavior. Peer roles reduce shame and internalize stigma. It allows the individual not just to take a look and, be accountable for what happened in their life, but also to view that experience from a different perspective. And when you change that perspective, you get closer to changing your identity, well, the identity of the individual. You know, when you're able to understand, or, when they're able to understand why something may have happened or have a much better understanding of what happened, then, shame and internalized stigma starts to reduce. Um, Sometimes, people like to say, hey, shame on you. I like to say shame off you. You know, as you mature, as your perspective grows, this shame uh, slowly but surely diminishes. So the key insight here is people don't change because systems demand it. They change when they believe they matter and belong to a community that expects greatness from them. This story here, I wanted it to demonstrate the protective factors increasing, identity shift towards purpose, as well as reduced recidivism risk decreasing and future leadership emerging as well too. So stuff that we could always factor in as well too as we are doing this type of work. Now, I do have a question for the audience. Feel free to speak, or you could just simply write it down in the chat box if we don't have much time. But I'd like to hear from everyone. What themes stood out to you in this journey? Don't all speak at once.
We've had a couple of messages in the chat. Somebody said hope. Another person said change through supported growth.
You know what, Lenora, if you don't mind me picking on you, and if you do mind, that's fine. Do you mind elaborating a bit more on what you wrote?
This is kind of the direction of where my passion is in that supporting um the the transition to self, and that can't happen in the same cycles of what's that keep them in the CJS. So bringing the change from the behaviors, separating the behaviors from the person, and then allowing that person to grow, to learn what can be and to grow from that, is a big key. What did I just? Sorry, I was moving things today. They're not their crimes, so who are they? But the challenge comes in helping them after the sentence, when the sentence hasn't actually ended. Because while the sentence, according to the courts and according to the law and justice, has ended, according to society, it hasn't. So it's supporting the growth from there.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Lenora. Thank you. I'm gonna pick on one more person. Sue, since you just typed, and like I said, if you don't feel like talking about it, that's fine. Do you mind elaborating a bit more? You mentioned inspiration.
Hi. Thanks. I loved the presentation. There was a lot of really excellent themes that were within this, and I think you covered so much territory in a short amount of time, so thank you for that. But just that final insight about the power of feeling, kind of this sense of belonging within a community that expects greatness. And I think it is true and I learned a new word today, I can't even say it. What was it again?
We've both been getting it wrong. I think it's persistence. I hope it's persistence. I wasn't saying it wrong the whole time.
Persistence. Yeah, yeah. Because I think you're right? That having that opportunity and building upon that in the role of peer mentor really does set those expectations that people want to continue to live up to. And so they're modeling those behaviors and living those behaviors and demonstrating that to inspire hope in others. And I see this a lot with, the peers, the peer mentors and peer support workers within our organization. So I think it really does save lives in a longer kind of trajectory that way. So I just love that last slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sue. All great comments. I read the comments in the chat box, by the way, so thank you everyone for your feedback on that. I'm just going to touch on collaboration, how collaboration makes reintegration possible. So when it comes to correction and community agencies, for anyone that, works in a community agency or corrections, either if it's federal or provincial, when supports begin before release and continue after release, recidivism is significantly reduced. A lot of our participants, to them, and to a certain degree it is, being in custody and being in the real world are two completely different worlds. They're two completely different settings, and, it feels like night and day. So especially when they do get out, there's that navigation piece that's a challenge already. That's where we see a lot of the drops and the gaps when they when they get released. And like I said, it comes to the navigation piece. But generally speaking, when they are connected with agencies or supports in custody that support them for however long they need to, up until they get out of until they get released back into the community, we see an increase, a reduced in recidivism as well too. The continuity of care prevents gaps that lead to homelessness and survival-based crime. Right now, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's against any agency or against any program out there, but a lot of like the problems that we are seeing right now, it takes more than a 3 month, 6 month, even a year program, for a lot of these issues that like are growing, with the population that we are serving as well too. Homelessness being a serious one, homeless employment being an issue for everyone, in Canada, but having a different type of negative impact with the population that we serve. So for anyone who's a housing provider, housing instability is one of the strongest predictors of recidivism. Safe housing supports mental health, community belonging, and employment readiness. That housing first approaches show immediate reductions in justice involvement. I would love to hear, people's thoughts on housing because, I feel like that's something that's growing as much as many different agencies, we work entirely around the clock in effort to address it. It's something that kind of just, I won't say it came out of nowhere, but it's when it rained, it started to pour, and it's still pouring. When it comes to this, but sometimes we just have to be creative when it comes to working with the individuals we're supporting, and getting them housing. Maybe taking a look like outside traditional routes to getting into housing, but either way, housing helps a lot when it comes to the individual reintegrating back into the community. Employers and career programs. So employment within 1 year of release cuts reoffending by up to 50%. Doesn't mean that, the individual is not going to reoffend, but it does reduces the chances of it happening. Employers trained in fair trans hiring improve long-term reintegration outcomes. So for everyone here, a lot of that is more, advocacy from us, but also to the education piece that helps them understand, the realities of the individuals that we're working with and breaking down, any type of stigmas or stereotypes they may have about the people that we're working with. But definitely trying to make that a more of a thing that employers can adopt or a way of thinking, fair chance hiring. And that skill building plus paid opportunities equals dignity and independence. Skill building, paid opportunities. There's always opportunities to grow as a person, as an individual, as an employer, as an employee. And that skill building piece there is important too. The mental health and wellness support. So 75% of federally incarcerated individuals in Canada have mental health or substance abuse challenges. Community-based treatment and peer support reduces those crisis intervention and reincarceration, as well as that trauma-informed care, improves engagement and healing. Like I said, not so much having sympathy, but having that empathy, a lot of this has been focused on that lived experience peer support piece. For everyone out there who's listening, well, for everyone who I know is listening, who I'm sure does a great job with the work that they do, like I said, we can always relate to each other with the feelings that we have, with the experiences that we have as well too. Your experience, even if it wasn't being in conflict with the criminal justice system, is not devalued because you don't have that necessary experience. But like I said, in knowing how to connect with people through your experiences, that's what will make the change and will make an impact in the individual you're supporting. So the key message here is no program succeeds alone. Reintegration happens at the intersection of housing, health, community, and opportunity, not just corrections. When any piece of this network breaks, the person falls through. Collaboration fills that gap. One of the best things as service providers we could do is continue to work with each other, continue to work with other agencies, work with the grassroots agencies, and I find in the grassroots agencies, that's where you'll find a lot of people with lived experience in that. Working together brings everything to play. So what we've learned today. So one, lived experience leadership is essential. So programs co-led by people with lived experience improve trust, culturally safety, and sustained engagement. Participants are more likely to identify with mentors who understand incarceration, racism, and stigma firsthand. Peer support leads to higher motivation and lower dropout rates. And I say, that lived experience leadership is essential. And I feel like something that a lot of bigger agencies in this space do, maybe not on purpose, but, they may tokenize an individual. I'm sure a lot of us, I know I've definitely been that guy. I'm not going to say any agency's name because I don't want to point anyone out. But, first of all, now that we're more aware of it, people see it, people identify it, people don't like it. So that's one way to kind of like turn people off from a program if they see that someone's just being used as a token or a front or a mascot. But actually having it, ingrained into the program, having it being some part of the fabric. Because like I said, it does work. Statistics shows it works, but at the same time, you want to make sure and create that safe space for them as well too. That trauma-informed practices improves engagement. 75% of justice-involved individuals have some sort of trauma history. When supports avoid retriggering punishment dynamics or participation rises. When a participant feels like, if I could say this, I'm not going to be punished for it, then that's when like, the real transformation starts to happen. Versus that power dynamic of if you say something that I don't like, this could probably be held against you. Trauma-informed approaches enhance emotional regulation and safety as well. So flexibility in delivery is critical. Community needs to differ between institutional and halfway house settings. Program success increases when timing adapts to work release requirements, as well as content reflects real-time transition challenges. Participants can show better retention when programming fits the reality. So, having that flexibility in respect to just like addressing what's in front of us in 2025 versus how things were done 20, 30, even 10 years ago is important. Either if it's, working deeper with other type of agencies or maybe, adjusting your approach, not changing your approach, but adjusting your approach in effort to meet the reality of what's in front of us right then. So stories plus data equals funding and longevity. Funders and justice systems require measurable outcomes. In this work that we do, transformational work is also story-driven. Lived experience is part of the evidence. Combining recidivism, employment, housing outcomes with personal narratives increases program continuation, investment, as well as partnerships as well too. I'm just being cognitive of the time, so I want to make sure I get through the material for everyone, and if anyone has any questions at the end. So some of the key messages here is, effective reintegration programming must be peer-led, trauma-informed, flexible, and backed by both human stories and measurable impact. We've learned that transformation is not just linear, but support must be consistent. Our job is to protect hope while people rebuild stability. So practical tools to take back. So peer mentor onboarding framework, actually having something in place to onboard, someone with lived experience versus just kind of like, handpicking them when it's convenient for the agency. And like I said, this isn't for anyone specific, but sometimes we could do this and not realize we're doing this. Having training in boundaries, trauma-informed care, safety, etc., on top of many other things that you could train your staff on. Having that ongoing supervision and structured reflection, as well as opportunities for skill development and leadership. There's the collaboration partner checklist, where there's the cross-sector alignment results in fewer service gaps, faster connection to housing and income supports or any other supports that the individual will need, as well as improved mental health, continuity, and post-release. Evaluation indicators count as well. So what gets measured gets funded and improved. And the 3 integration success indicators prioritized by the Canadian Justice Research are service access, the participants connect with housing, health and addictions care, or any other type of care that addresses the issues that they have, as well as employment supports as well too. And the well-being improvements. So measured through the reduced stress and trauma symptoms, improved resilience and sense of belonging, and pro-social support network. And this is usually things that the individual will share with you. You will also see it through their actions, we'll see it through their intentions. But more importantly, like as it all comes together in the larger picture of things, it ends up being, a positive outcome for the person that we're supporting. Sustained employment and education, remember employment within the first year of release reduces their chances of recidivism by up to 50%. And still skills training improves that earning potential as well too. If you want to earn more, you have to learn more. Skills pay the bill, simple as that. Defining success. Success is not just staying out of jail, it's also building a life worth living. So the reduced recidivism, like we mentioned, the access to reintegration supports leads to up to 50% reductions in reoffending. Peerless supports improve program completion, as well as that long-term assistance. Man, this word right here. Increased employment and education. So employment within 12 months of, oops, I think I just said that. And improved mental health and family stability. Mental health, that mental wellness and trauma-informed support decreases crisis prevention and reincarceration, as well as having a strong family and community connections, double desistance likelihood. We should just call this title that word there, assistance. But yeah. As well, the opportunity for participants to become mentors, so identity shifting from offender to a role model, that identity piece again. How you look at yourself determines how you're going to behave. So giving back reinforces self-worth and accountability. Peer mentors show the strongest long-term success outcomes. Having a peer mentor is not just having someone there doing work, but it's also a symbol of like, this is how your outcome will look. Not necessarily being as fly and cool as me, but just saying, getting to your idea of what success looks for you. The key message here is, I was once supported, now I support others. It's not just a quote, but it's a measurable justice innovation. So a quick Q&A. We have a couple minutes left, so however fast we can get through it, we will. But it's a live poll. Just based off of what I've talked about today, which reintegration priority would you implement first in your organization? 1, peer mentorship, integration. 2, trauma-informed practices. 3, housing and employment partnerships. Or 4, enhanced post-release continuity of care. We can give it about another 30 seconds and then we can end the poll. Some good responses here. Thanks everyone. I made this here just in case we had more time, but knowing me and how much I talk a lot, we're not going to be able to get to this. But I would still say reflect on these questions. I was hoping to have this discussion with you, but just in the interest of time, I will be wrapping up. I will also share that we do have a peer mentor training through Safeguards training. So if you're ever interested in learning more about the peer mentor training or bringing this to your staff, please feel free to reach out to us at Safeguards training. That does bring me to the end of today's session. I actually enjoyed talking about this, as funny as it sounds. And I hope you guys enjoy listening to me as well too. Thank you so much once again. My name is Olusola Olumogba with Safeguards Training. And yes, I will pass it back to the facilitator. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. So please join me in thanking our speakers for their great presentations and sharing their knowledge with us. When you have the time, please take a moment to fill in the survey for this session. Again, if you click on the agenda on the platform, you'll be able to choose the current session you're attending. And next to the join button, there will be a survey button, and you can click on that to complete the short survey. We encourage you to take some time to Connect with fellow participants and visit our poster and exhibitor halls where you can view poster presentations and connect with our exhibitors. Don't forget to add resources from our exhibitors to your personal swag bag. To build your own agenda by adding sessions to your calendar, click Add to the Add to Calendar button. We would appreciate if you would also take a few moments to complete the conference evaluation. You can access the conference evaluation by clicking on the evaluation icon on the conference homepage in the menu bar. Your feedback will be anonymous and appreciated, and we use it to plan future events such as today's conference. Again, thank you everyone for participating in this session. Please join us for day 1 closing ceremonies. Click on the agenda on the platform again and choose closing remarks and click the join button for that one. So thank you everyone for attending.